Hi, I'm Seth, and today we're going to talk about some easy repairs to do on the saxophone. When looking for the serial number on your saxophone, you can usually find it down at the bottom, at the back, just below the thumb rest. The most popular repair on the saxophone is almost always the octave key, and that's this one right here. Usually that is because when they're putting it together, the student is bending this key right here. They're grabbing it, they're bending it, everything's getting all messed up as they're putting it together. Just make sure that they're holding it by the top up here, not down here as they're assembling it. If it does get bent, you can easily just hang on to it. Again, if you feel comfortable, and bending it back, either up or down into place so that this part right here is going to be touching the mechanism on the top of the neck. While we're talking about the neck, this neck cork, make sure it's in good working order, make sure that it's not falling off. To help maintain the neck cork, make sure you're using some cork grease on that regularly. To help maintain your saxophone, you either need a pull-through swab or what is called a pad saver. This is called a pad saver. This is a big fluffy thing that shoves inside, sometimes affectionately known as a shove-it. And on the top of it, it has an end plug. That helps keep your octave key from getting bent. If you're going to use a pull-through swab, make sure you use the end cap to keep your octave key in good condition. When you're putting your neck on, this screw up here only needs to be slightly tightened, okay? Very, very slight tension on this. Otherwise, it will break. If you find that your neck is not going on smoothly, wipe both parts of the tenon clean. There should be no lubrication on these tenons. It should just be dry metal on metal. Again, rotating it in, not trying to rock it back and forth. That's going to bend the metal. So line it up straight and work it in. Tighten up this screw, finger tight, not cranked. Make sure that the octave key here is in line so that it's going to open at the right time. Sometimes on a saxophone, a pad will fall out. The pad itself is actually made up of leather, felt, and cardboard. Leather gets very hard and brittle after it's gotten wet, which is why pad savers or pull-through swabs are so important. Sometimes though, the pad will fall out. If it does fall out and it's an emergency, you can put it back in with either pad cement or with hot glue. To do that, you're going to find the key, unscrew the pivot screw or the rod, take off the key, clean the pad cup, which is what the pad sits into. Try to put that pad back in, hot glue it or use pad cement, and try to level it with the tone hole. That's always the tricky part. But in an emergency, sometimes you have to do that. Again, if you do not feel comfortable, just send it into the repair shop. When your students are done with the saxophone, make sure they get into a good habit of taking off the neck strap. I know some of them are hard to get off, but when you put that back into the case, if that neck strap is still attached, it can bend some of these keys, causing quite a problem. On the saxophone, there's only a few keys that are actually sprung shut. One of them is the G-sharp key, activated by the top here. Sometimes that is closed so much that it doesn't want to open up, so you might have to give that a bit of a lift. If you find your G-sharp key is sticking, you can always clean off the tone hole by opening up the key, adding a little bit of paper between the key and the tone hole, closing the key, and pulling out the paper gently. That should take off any residue that's on the tone hole, and then it should work properly. Again, if it doesn't fix it, make sure you send it into a repair shop. Sometimes on the saxophone, your keys and rods get bent. Most of the time that's from mishandling. Sometimes it's just from hanging onto them like this, where you're bending these rods. Sometimes it's actually from being in the case, and students will put other things in the case on top of the instrument, like books, other things like that. They'll close the case, putting pressure on these rods and some of these keys. Make sure that they're not doing that. If a rod gets bent, you really want to send that into the repair shop. If one of these keys get bent, if you feel comfortable again, you can take your pliers with no knurls, you can try to find out which way it's bent. Think of all of the 4 directions of that it can be: up, down, left, right, all of those planes, trying to bend it back into place. While you're down there, have a look at some of the guards. Make sure all the guards have the screws that they're supposed to have. Make sure that those screws are in the guard and that they are tight. Sometimes while students are playing, you might hear a slight rattle. That could be from a guard screw being loose. On the saxophone, just like any of the other woodwinds, they have springs that are holding these keys either sprung open or shut. They're essentially little wires. On older saxophones, those springs were actually needles, razor sharp needles. So if you have an older saxophone, just take care when you're actually adjusting some of those springs, because they will hurt if they get you. Again, you're going to take your spring hook, you're going to either pull it or push it, depending on what side of that key it needs to be on, and latching it into place. Lastly, have a look at your mouthpiece. Make sure that the face, the rails, and the tip are all in good condition. That reed has to seal that perfectly when it's vibrating. Anything on there can hamper the sound. Remember to make sure to update your inventory on anything you find with your saxophone.